All right, hopefully you enjoyed those two videos and you can see what I was referring to as far as this unreliability issue. And the other thing I would warn you about administering the marshmallow test to a child that you know, if you have a child that takes the marshmallow, if you're like me, as a good psychologist, you're going to think, oh no, you took the marshmallow. And I kind of used it as a learning lesson for my child. Well, you're the sort of kid who took the marshmallow, and so you have to consciously assert your self control. And so my daughter's life was spent under the impression that she's the kind of kid who takes a marshmallow. She was at a high school when that study came out that reported unreliable environment predicts whether you take it or not. And, I did share that with her also. I said, you know what? It might have been that you didn't trust me. I may have been unpredictable. And so when I offered that I'd give you two, you might have thought, yeah, I've heard this sort of thing before. And that's why. Now I'm realizing that it might have all been about your trust for me and my reliability. And so you may not be the sort of kid who took the marshmallow. You might be the sort of kid who learned that, mom may not come back with another marshmallow. So, because I can tell you now, she's a full-fledged adult. And I can tell you that she does not have any of the things that correlate with having taken the marshmallow. She has all of the things that correlate with waiting. So what are some things that are what we would call correlates with waiting? In adolescence, we have a series of factors, and then in young adulthood, we have a series of factors that have been associated. Children who waited and didn't just eat the marshmallow in adolescence displayed greater confidence. They were more trustworthy. They tended to tell the truth more. They were more dependable. They tended to follow through with things that they promised to do. They were more resilient. In fact, they welcomed challenges. They tended to label challenges as challenges rather than as roadblocks. They tended, when faced with something that was difficult, they tended to display perseverance. They worked on it longer when they faced any kind of challenge or difficulty. In young adulthood, they saw better academic outcomes, like better concentration. Again, with the persistence, right? Persistence towards the goal of completing a class, or persistence towards the goal of completing their degree. Higher college test placement scores on average among those who waited and versus those who didn't. They in young adulthood tend to be more socially competent. They tend to enter in more stable relationships, whether we're talking about friendships or we're talking about romantic relationships. They tend to have more stable relationships, less turmoil, and they tend to be more dependable employees than those children who took the marshmallow. Now, some things that you can, of course, assume to a certain extent that if you waited, you tend to have more of these qualities, and if you didn't wait, you tend to have less of these qualities. But then there were some other things that really were correlating well with not waiting, that we saw among those kids who didn't wait for the researcher to come back before eating the marshmallow. And again, some of them manifested themselves in adolescence, and some of them manifested themselves in young adulthood. So in adolescence, higher rates of teenage pregnancy among those kids who, as 4-year-olds, didn't wait. More substance use among those kids, higher dropout rates, and more of what we call antisocial behavior. So more of those behaviors that would fall on the list of antisocial personality disorder kind of behaviors. And those all pertain to things like taking advantage of other people, breaking laws. Let's see, I think that pretty much covers the two big categories of behaviors. And so under breaking laws, obviously ranging from little small things up to really big things. And then with regard to taking advantage of people, it could be just sort of being kind of a user kind of level of small, all the way up to taking advantage of people as far as manipulating them into being able to take their money or other kinds of things. So there's a wide range in what could be included under antisocial behavior. Young adulthood, we see higher rates of criminality that include crimes involving drugs, theft, violence. So now we're starting to get into some legit law breaking. And they tend to display less social competence. So they have that flip of what I had said about the waiting. We have, unstable relationships are much more common among the children who took the marshmallow than among the children who didn't, and less stable employment. And so not just that you're a dependable employee, so you're an undependable employee. Here we have unstable employment where you may have difficulty keeping a job. You may walk off of jobs, things like that. All right, so that concludes what the marshmallow test might be able to tell us about self-control. Let's transition into a different kind of self-control, which is something that as a student, I'm sure you can completely relate to, the notion of procrastination. I mean, all of us procrastinate sometimes, but some of us do it more than others, and some of us do it across more situations than others do. So Bruce Tuckman defined procrastination as the tendency to put off or completely avoid an activity that is under your control. So you could be working on the activity, you could be thinking about it, you could be planning, you could be doing stuff, but you've decided to put it off or try to pretend like you kind of don't have it hanging over your head. So you put it off consciously and say to yourself, I can do it tomorrow. Or you might sort of just try to ignore that this thing is looming and that it's coming. So either one of those. Okay, so in our book, we have the procrastination scale on page 84 that can help give a little bit of insight into whether you have a tendency to procrastinate or not. So on page 84, we have hold on, I'm having a problem here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and go like that. We're going to go over to page 84, which has our procrastination scale. And again, it's going to be on a Likert type scale, which for some reason is listed in reverse order so that the 4 is listed first. Believe me, I wouldn't have done this if I designed the scale. But the 1 still means that you disagree, and the 4 means that you agree. So I guess that's good. But you'll notice there's only 4, so there's no middle of the road. You have to either lean towards agreeing or you have to lean towards disagreeing. So you can go ahead and pause and go and complete this scale. It's 16 items, and then it tells you how to score it at the end. And so you can go ahead and refer to your PDF, come back and join me. I'm going to assume you're going to pause me so that you can come back and join me. All right, so hopefully you're back, and hopefully you took the scale. This is a much more fun class if you participate and do the scales. This scale is scored in such a way after you've gotten done flipping items and stuff like that. It indicates greater tendency to procrastinate if you have a higher score. So higher scores, higher procrastination. So this, I'm going to look at it one more time. Sorry about the hopping. This scale is sort of general procrastination. I needlessly delay finishing jobs. I postpone starting on things. When I have a deadline, I wait till the last minute, right? It's sort of, I tend to put things off is what it's asking. There are different kinds of procrastination actually available to us. We have the type where we put things off, and it could be sort of out of sight, out of mind putting it off, or it could be more of a deliberate putting it off. And those are two different kinds of procrastination, actually. At least some researchers think that they're two different kinds of procrastination. The type where you put it off because you don't want to do it versus putting it off because maybe you think you do better when you're under pressure. Like those are two different motives, right? So why do we procrastinate depending on these different motives? So if we keep thinking about it under the category of self-control, we could say procrastination allows us to pursue the short-term rewards of not having to work on it right now, not having to think or do anything about it right now. And those short-term rewards are outweighing maybe our long-term goal of wanting to get it done or wanting to get a good grade or needing to finish this for that bonus we're working for or whatever, right? The short-term rewards are outweighing the long-term goals. So there are different kinds of factors that go into why the short-term rewards are more powerful. One, sometimes we procrastinate when the task is too hard. Writing papers would be a really good example of that for most of us. Is that, it's too hard. Maybe I have to read some scientific articles, and then I have to, first I have to find some scientific articles, and then I have to read them, and then I have to understand what they say, and then I have to put it into my own words, and it's just too hard. I don't want to. It's too hard. It's also possible that the task is too easy or boring, and so it's drudgery, and I don't want to, right? I don't know if weeding the garden is too hard or too easy and boring, honestly, because I have a section of my garden that I have got to weed, and I haven't done it. And part of it is it's kind of hard. You've got to either dig a little bit so that it loosens the roots, and then pull hard enough to get the roots out. So there's a little like tension on your hands. So I guess that's hard. But then it's also too easy, kind of boring in the sense of pull the weed, pull the weed, pull the weed, pull the weed, pull the weed. I'd also throw in on weeding that there's like aversive things. I've got a bug bite on my knee right now because of weeding in the garden. Sometimes things are biting you. Sometimes it's hot. Sometimes it's cold. Sometimes it's, insert other uncomfortable thing here. So I guess that falls under hard. I don't know. For a lot of people, procrastination in the face of a difficult task is really about sort of anxiety or depression about the eventual performance evaluation. So it's a hard task, and I'm afraid I'm not going to measure up. I'm afraid, or I'm sad because I know I'm not going to measure up, and I know that I'm going to get bad feedback, so I'm sad about it. So sometimes that's the reason why the too hard task gets procrastinated on. Sometimes people procrastinate through what we call misattribution. They may say to themselves, I work better under pressure, or I'll work just as hard in the 4 hours before it's due as I would if I spread it out ahead of time. I'd probably spend 4 hours anyway, so why don't I just do it in one big fell swoop? I'll just do it all at one time. This is under the category of misattribution because most people don't work better under pressure. They may feel like they can finally clear everything else out of their head and just concentrate on the task. That might be part of what they mean by I work better under pressure. But objective ratings of product that was constructed under pressure versus product that was constructed with more, sort of like lists and time between and preparation, hands down, whether you have other humans rating it or you have computer programming rating the quality, always the work that has been produced over time gets better ratings than work that was produced in the last minute. Now, you're going to point to possibly those times that you dashed something off in the last hours before something was due and you got full credit, and that's evidence that you did better. And maybe you turned in something that you worked on across time and got a poorer grade. You might say, well, see, there's evidence. But those are different circumstances, whereas the research on this topic has had the exact same outputs, exact same things being produced, and the exact same rubrics being applied to the output. And what the research suggests is that you actually produce better work if you give yourself time. Then we get into probably the crux of the matter, which is the rewards and punishments. By putting off a task, you get the reward of not having to work on it right now. That's beautiful. And you might get the reward of you got an adequate outcome anyway. Like, why work for 2 weeks if I can just work for like 2 hours and I get the same outcome? Maybe I get the same grade, or I get the same amount of pay, or I get the same exact status. So why bother doing it so much earlier when I got to have, 2 free weeks and then 2 hours of work when I got the same outcome? And so you can imagine that that's pretty rewarding. And it's one of the things that's a problem, is that we all get rewarded sometimes for procrastinated behavior. And so that's unfortunate. There are punishments that people want to avoid also. Sometimes people don't procrastinate because they don't want that stress right near the deadline. Others think, if I don't start ahead of time, I'm not going to get it done. And that's a real risk. And I don't want to face the punishment that would come from not getting it done. Or maybe I'll get a poor result. I won't produce what is needed and I'll end up with a bad grade, or I'll end up not getting paid, or whatever it is. And I think that because a lot of times there are no punishments that come. If you say, oh, no, I didn't meet the deadline, will you still take it? A lot of times people will be like, okay, I'll still accept it. And so there are no negative repercussions. You still have extra time to complete the task. Maybe by taking that extra time, you were able to get the full result that you wanted. And so as a result, you end up rewarded for procrastination because you avoided those punishments, right? The punishments didn't come. And so when we look at, it through the lens of self-control, a person might think there's no benefit to showing self-control over the course of the days or weeks leading up to the assignment, because I can dash it off at the end. If it takes longer than I anticipated, I can always just ask for more time. Nothing bad ever comes from it. So why would I bother to do anything else? And so you can imagine a reward and punishment structure probably works really well to help ensure that people will procrastinate. I think that's why we all can relate to it so well, is because we've all procrastinated over something. One of the questions is whether it is, I guess, a standard process for an individual, or if it's something that you just rarely do, that you sometimes do in certain circumstances. Some people procrastinate over everything, and other people rarely procrastinate. I found that I was procrastinating about my participation as a Girl Scout service unit manager. I wasn't preparing for the meetings until the day of the meetings, and I started to evaluate, why was I doing that? Why was I procrastinating over something that was like my volunteer hobby type of thing to be doing? And what I started to realize is I didn't really like it. I didn't want to. It was too punishing to do it. And so I knew that was when it was time to step down as service unit manager, is that I was procrastinating about preparations. I don't want to do this, obviously. So sometimes when you procrastinate, it might be a good time for self-reflection and find out, is this something I just don't want to do? Why am I doing it then? Especially if it's something that's optional, right? Like my volunteer work. I didn't have to be doing that. It's the nature of volunteer work, isn't it? So if you're finding yourself procrastinating, it is a really good idea to look at the reasons why. If you're finding that the reason is the task seems too hard, or it seems too easy or boring, then address that. Okay, if the task seems too hard, what would it take to make it more doable or less overwhelming? Like, what can we do about that? If it's too easy or boring, how can you make it more fun? How could you make it more interesting? Try to avoid that misattribution where you say, well, it's actually to my benefit to procrastinate. Instead, focus on the rewards that you could get from having the job done early. Getting it done is the point. Why does it need to be done on the day of, or in the hour right before, and run the risk of being late, or not doing a good job, things like that. So if you stop and you think and you evaluate, you may discover that it's worth your while to not put yourself under that stress of procrastinating and instead work on things earlier. We find that procrastination is more common among perfectionists. If I can't do it perfectly, I don't want to even start, because I know it's not going to be good enough. And I know I'm not going to be happy with it at the end. And other people are going to tell me it's fine. And other people are going to tell me that it's good work. And I'm still going to be disappointed in it. And I still don't want to turn it in because it is not perfect. So that's a really common issue with procrastination, is that it has to be perfect or I'm not doing it. The other thing that pops up in explanations of procrastination is something called self-handicapping. And that is what we will address in the next video.